Hello, I'm Jonathan Field, the Managing Director and one of the founders of PTFS Europe. PTFS Europe was formed in 2007, providing expertise in the library automation market in the UK. And we support over 130 libraries, both in the UK and beyond. And as an organisation, we have always been a virtual company. All our staff are based in the UK and they all work from home. And we're delighted to welcome you today to our PTFS Europe Festival, a 2-hour online conference specifically directed at the needs of the FE sector. But we know there's some people online today from other sectors as well, and you're also most welcome. Our festival came about due to a growing interest in the COA open source library management system, particularly in the further education market. It is a sector that's undergone a lot of changes over the past 10 to 15 years, with mergers and many institutions growing in size. And this change has meant that previous library management systems, which were often designed for schools or small colleges, are no longer adequate for institutions that have become large in size and are teaching both FE and in many cases HE courses as well. And for that reason, FE colleges are looking more and more at the COA open source library management system as an alternative to their existing system. It's a mature, reliable system and is very cost effective for FE budgets. Koha, which means gift in Maori, is used right across the world and across all different types of libraries of all shapes and sizes. In the UK, we work with large public libraries, government libraries, NHS libraries, right down to small one-man libraries. And of course, we're very much involved in the FE and the HE sector as well. And today, because of the current lockdown in the UK, we've decided to do something a little bit different, a totally online conference with sessions that we hope you'll find varied and enjoyable. And you're very welcome to stay for the full 2 hours or dip in and out as you please. All of the sessions that we do today will be recorded and they'll be available to view later if you wish to. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers, Fiona Borthwick, Lucy Vox-Harvey, John Turner and Janet McGowan, as well as Andrew Auld from PTFS Europe for putting together the content for today's session. But we're particularly grateful to Sam Goldsmith from the University Centre Leeds and Penny Robertson and George Harkins from the City of Glasgow College for giving up their time and for their excellent contributions. If you have time, I would heartily recommend you look at Sam's research into whether there is a gender difference in the take-up of individual skills support. We've provided a link to our online form, and I know that she'll be very grateful if you did have the time to go and have a look at it and complete it if you can. Throughout the afternoon, there will be opportunities to ask questions to all of our speakers, and we'd request that if you're in the Zoom session, you direct your questions via chat to the Ask Us a Question user. And if you're in YouTube, then feel free to use the live chat facility. And our speakers will be around all afternoon, so please do ask questions as you think of them and as they arise. And if we don't get to answer all the questions, we can answer them subsequently. There will also be a short break before Sam's presentation, just to allow you a time for a quick comfort break and to refill your coffee mug. We hope you enjoy our conference today. So now we move on to the introductory session, where I will be talking to Andrew Auld about the power of open source and the emergence of open source software in the library automation market over the past 10 to 15 years.
So I'm Andrew Auld. I've joined Jonathan for this session on the power of open source software. there might be some of you in the audience who haven't really heard much about open source software. So, Jonathan, perhaps you could explain a little bit to all of us what it is.
Yeah, so open source software is software that's written and distributed under a free license. So what that means in practice is that anybody can take that code, they can adapt that code, or they can use that code as part of something else that they're producing. And the rights of the license, and there are quite a few open source licenses out there, allow people to do that. And it's not uncommon when you meet people, maybe less so these days, but not uncommon that people will look at you blankly when you talk about open source. But if I just take a few examples and show you a couple of examples that you might sort of be familiar with in your day-to-day life. So, I mean, if I say to you, Andrew, have you heard of WordPress, Google Chrome, then, you know, have you heard of those applications?
Yeah.
And I'm sure most people are using those in their day-to-day life. I mean, obviously WordPress, massively, hugely used blogging platform. But if we think in the context of the further education sector in particular, there's a wide adoption of things like Moodle as a virtual learning environment, and also Shibboleth in the context of authentication. And I guess what a lot of people don't realize is that a large part of the sort of web that we use day in, day out, so you know, these sort of large websites that we use regularly are built on open source platforms, often Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP and Perl. And even in our sort of personal lives, I mean, you know, you're a musician, I'm a musician, I regularly use Audacity for editing music that I might have recorded and want to edit and adapt. So people think it's not commonly day-to-day stuff, but it is. It's in use in all our everyday lives.
I've heard, though, that there's some resistance to open source and possibly even misinformation about it. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, very much so. And we kind of think of that as something perhaps from the past, and is something that's is not so common now, but we still see it. I mean, this is an example of, you know, on a website recently, and it's the sort of what we describe as FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So putting fear, uncertainty, and doubt in people's minds about open source. So it even goes as far as sort of talking about stealing your data, which is, you know, a ridiculous kind of statement, really, particularly in this day and age when it is so widely used and adopted. So it is a total sort of misunderstanding, really, of what free software is. And free with open source, okay, it's not completely free. I think most people who understand open source realize that open source software is not totally free. The software is free, but there's a cost of ownership behind that. And I think that's widely understood and by most people now. But obviously, some of the fear and uncertainty and doubt that's put into people's head really has no basis whatsoever.
Right, and despite this sort of fear and uncertainty and doubt being spread about the place, do the proprietary software companies, do they avoid using open source software? Do they not use any open source software at all?
Well, I guess that's part of the irony of open source software, is that amongst proprietary vendors, you find it is widely used in their applications. So again, just picking out some examples, the Apache web server, the JBoss engine, Elasticsearch, MySQL, these are all tools that are used day in, day out in applications, and, you know, regularly used in proprietary applications. And again, you've probably been onto websites that are commercial websites, and in the URL bar, you'll see that one of the file extensions will be a PHP file extension. So there's plenty of examples out there, and that is kind of the irony, really, that proprietary vendors do use open source all the time, even though they suggest that there is this sort of problem behind it.
Okay, so focusing a bit more on the library automation market now, is open source library management systems or library solutions, are they relatively new to the market now?
Well, the Koha library management system is hugely mature. I mean, it's 20 years old this year. It's used right across the world. It's used in probably around about 15,000 libraries worldwide. From the heat map you can see on the screen now, you can see it's used widely in Africa, India, China, and so it goes on. It's very widely used. The other open source library application we work with, Folio, that's a much newer application. That's only been around 3 or 4 years. So in terms of its maturity compared to Koha, it's very new. But again, the open source projects that work well are projects that have large uptake and adoption. And that's certainly been true of the Folio project. It's again been widely adopted. It's widely supported by commercial companies and libraries, university libraries, and so on.
Is that the International Space Station use it out in space? Is that little green dot?
Dot there. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, we're intergalactic.
Excellent, excellent. Given that open source software is developed by developers and they don't have to be necessarily paid developers, developers right across the world, can libraries be assured that it's trusted and secure?
Yeah, I mean, again, interestingly enough, if we go back to 2014, the government at the time put out a document, the Cabinet Office and the Home Office put out a document called All About Open Source. And it didn't say go out and use open source, but what it did say is that in your procurement exercise, you should at the very least, be considering open source as an option, because of all the benefits that we know about open source, the cost effectiveness and all the other benefits. And that's still true now. If you go onto the current government website, there's plenty of information about open source as well. So it's trusted at the government level, but in terms of us as a company, we are an ISO 27001 accredited company. It's a difficult accreditation to get. You have to be re-accredited every year. The testing is very thorough, and it tests everything from the way you handle your software and the hardware side of things, right down to how you handle staff and your day-to-day procedures. And across our customer bases, we have customers working in all different types of sectors. And many of these sectors are sectors that are concerned about these sort of issues. So we work with government libraries, we work with higher education, we work with international law firms, and so on. So it's an important issue, and I think as it says in the as Bilbo Baggins says in the Lord of the Rings, it's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out to your door. And I guess that is true. It's that there's security issues around us all the time, and actually what it's about is how you mitigate any issues. And of course that doesn't just apply to open source software, that applies to proprietary software as well. So it's how you handle that, the procedures in place.
Okay, so you mentioned on the previous slide just how widely Koha is being used globally, and how it's been embraced as a library management system right across the world. So how does that Koha community work in practice?
Yeah, so the Koha community it's a massive global community. As I've said earlier, there's 15,000 plus libraries using Koha worldwide. So it is a big community, and obviously the success of open source projects really depend on their uptake. Obviously in the UK, we're very much behind supporting Koha, but there's other companies of similar size and standing as us in mainland Europe and in the US and New Zealand, Australia, and beyond really. So, and amongst those companies, they all have a support presence, they all have a development presence, and we have several developers working full-time on Koa, and a lot of these other companies do as well. So when you bring all that resource together, you actually have a very big pool of people writing code, sorting out bugs, QAing the software, writing documentation, and so it goes on.
Do libraries get involved in the development then?
Very much so, yeah. So we have, I mean, in the UK, as is the case in many parts of the world, you tend to have local requirements that apply to your region specifically, and a lot of our libraries in the UK, they often club together and sponsor development that's specific to their market spaces.
Great. So what's PTFS Europe's role in all of this?
Well, strangely enough, our role is not dissimilar to if you were working with a proprietary vendor. So we do all the things you would expect us to do, really: project management, the installation and configuration of the software, migrating the data from one system, a legacy system, to the current system is a big part of it. We do the training. As I mentioned earlier, all our staff are based in the UK, so that's local trainers on site. And as I just mentioned, we do a lot of software development as well as a company. And obviously ongoing hosting of the systems and a sort of help desk system as well.
Great. You mentioned a few organisations that PTFS Europe works with, but tell us a bit more about who we work with.
Yeah, so obviously today we're really talking about the further education sector, and we have a lot of libraries, and I've got a sort of list of some of them here in that sector, but we're obviously working outside of these sectors, and one of the beauties of Koa is it's very adaptable to all shapes and sizes of libraries. So we work with big public libraries. As I mentioned, we work with government libraries, NHS libraries, museum libraries. But in the context of today, we work in higher education, but we also work very much in further education, which is a big sector for us.
Great. Well, just to sum up, perhaps, Jonathan, what would you say are the key benefits then of an open source solution?
Yeah, well, I guess the one that people always think about, and as I said earlier, Koha, the cost of using Koha is not free, but the license is free itself. So it's definitely cost effective. That's for certain. We rarely find that it's not cost effective. So that would be one of the biggest benefit, I guess, of open source software. But I guess the other advantage is the sort of rapid development of the software, because there is this big community behind it, and because users are directing the sort of direction of the software, then there's a big benefit for the end user, because they can actually have a say in where the software is going. So they don't have to wait for years for something that they've been hoping for not to appear in the software, which is often what you do have happen. You do get rigorous sort of QA in the software. So again, I mentioned there's a lot of people working on Koa, and it's the thing that people say about open source: you have many eyes looking at the software from many different organizations. So that's a big benefit of open source. And I guess finally, it is, in a way, it is the future. It is the direction of travel. If you think of some of the big, large organizations out there, they're choosing to develop their platforms on open source software. So we can take people like, who you all have heard of, like Facebook, who developed React and Redux as their user interface, and it's widely used in all sorts of applications. And as it happens, it's being used in the Folio library services platform as the front end interface. You have people like Twitter, who developed the Bootstrap framework, the responsive framework, to deploy their applications. And again, that's widely used in all sorts of applications within libraries and outside of libraries. And you go through to people like the BBC, who do a huge amount of research and development, and most of their software that they're producing is produced under open source licenses for free distribution.
Well, great, Jonathan. That's given us all a really good overview of what open source is about and why it's of interest, perhaps, to some of the people watching this today. As with all the sessions today, if you have any questions, please make sure you're using the chat in Zoom to ask a question. There's an Ask a Question user. If you just ask your question as a direct message, we'll try and respond to as many questions as possible. Jonathan's around all afternoon, and so we'll be able to answer any questions you have about the detail of what you've just seen. Thanks very much, Jonathan.
Great, thanks.